My name's Philip Watson. I'm an editor at Thames and Hudson. In fact, I have the privilege of being Charles's editor, Charles Freger, who is the photographer who has initiated all kinds of projects that have resulted in books, I'm delighted to say, as a publisher, which have been enjoyed great popularity, not just in the UK and the US, but also in Japan and France, where Charles is from. France, that is, not Japan. And he's also well known in Germany, which says something about the title of Wilder Mann, the photographs that some of you may be familiar with, who may have seen in Belfast. These are photographs that Wilder Mann is the German for it has a sort of relationship with the savage archetypes, wild archetypes of half man, half beast, and a relationship of people living in the present but in touch with their ancestral traditions. And you'll see a lot of this that reappears in Charles's work. He's done projects notably on women in Brittany and their lace headdresses, which are identifiers of a kind that's very personal. A Japanese project, Yokai no Shima, which means island of monsters, roughly speaking, because the translation is not exact. There is another project that appeared 2 years ago called Cimarron, which is about the slave diaspora from Africa living around the world, especially in South America and in the United States of America, in the southern states. Again, these are photographs that celebrate the tradition of masquerade. And masquerade, that is a celebration of seasons and ancestral traditions. And they're kind of portraits, they're human portraits in an archetypal form that we don't get to see very much. We don't see them in museums or galleries. They're very particular. And Charles has this, I would say, unique skill in being able to identify and photograph authentically people living their own continuing traditions, and it's a very compelling source of your work, Charles. I hope I've introduced you adequately. I'm going to I've mentioned a few of your projects. There's another one coming up that we're publishing together at the beginning of next year called Asta, which is based in India, and explores the relationship of man with religion and spiritual properties. So again, there are photographs that celebrate this masquerade, a kind of a crossover between portraiture and masquerade, which is unusual and compelling. And Charles, I hope you don't. I hope you find that reasonably accurate, what I've introduced of your work. Can you hear me there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, great. I can hear you. Hi, Charles.
Yeah, well, I think it's accurate. Yeah.
Good. Can I ask you a couple of questions to start, or do you want to say something to start?
No. I follow your question. That's fine.
Sure. Okay. I guess some people will be familiar with your work already, and some people may not have seen it. Yeah. But what you're really showing us is a sort of adventure. It's an imaginative adventure. Mm-hmm. So what I want to ask you is, how do your ideas first take shape? How do you think up a new project?
I think first of the idea of a territory. Like I try directly to imagine if a photographic project is a short series or a very large one. And let's say that the last 10 years, I've worked much more on that long-term project. So I quickly try to find what are the limits of that territory and where I should go to finish a project. So step by step, I do some research. With the help of certain people I get in touch with in the countries. And then I try to understand where I should go, where I should stop. And then I jump into that project. And from that, I think that step by step, I really start to understand what I'm working on. Like it's not from the start that I know exactly what's the subject of my research.
You spend a long time doing research before you pick up your camera.
Well, it's yeah, but what you may call research may sound like I'm in a library and or spending time on internet, or it's not about that. It's more instinctive. It's more like maybe I've seen something somewhere, and I felt connected to that something, to this in particular. So I feel, oh, I should work on. There's something into that that I want to work on, and from that, I start to look around, buy some books, a lot of books, and any document I find is going to be helpful. Then I start some conversation with some people who know the place, who know the territory, who know the culture, and I start to hear some new words. And these words, they have a sound to me. So, you know,
So
the
you have a kind of natural curiosity and you follow your curiosity.
yeah, well, I would love to be more curious than I am, but yeah, a way to I see that there's something to do on one subject, and then I try, especially now, to check if I'm able to do it or not, if I wish to jump into that subject or not. And curious or not, first I have to be able to do it. I have to know if I'm the right person to work on that subject.
You know, what's really interesting to me is that so many of your projects are not visible to, you know, most of us don't go very far. Most of us don't look very far. We don't look outside our world, but you look outside our world and you find things that we can't usually see. So it's not that you're superhuman, but you turn on some kind of curiosity which you follow, and that's what brings us into your pictures as well, I think, is this sense of you know, what makes you want to explore further? That's the question. Why do you want to do that?
What makes well, it's I'm not I mean it's frankly, I don't feel I'm really much a globetrotter. Like I'm not like feeling, oh, I have to go for a trip, or I'm not the happiest man when I'm jumping into an airplane. Like if what I have to photograph is at the corner of my street, then I would be happy with it. It's the last project in India was we had to go all over India, and but seriously, if I could have done it around here, I would have done it here for sure. So so my wish is not to go where people are not going. It's also sometimes I'm photographing things that people are seeing when they go for holidays, but they just pass. They just look at that as a touristic attraction, and I try to go behind this, like you know, like the last book the new book we're going to do about India has something to do with this. I know people who say, oh yeah, I know India, I've been there a few times, I've been traveling there for tourism and so on, and they have an idea of what's India. So they're behind all the subject I'm dealing with, there are a lot of stereotypes, there are a lot of prefab ideas, I would say, that, you know, it's and cliche. So then I like to play with this cliche as well. I like to explore these stereotypes. I like to, what we call in France the image d'épinal, is that there are some certain cliche which somehow come from the 19th century and been delivered to us in history books, children books, in fairy tale and so on. And we are constantly, we have a lot of images in mind from all these the TV, cinema, etc., etc. So from I have the same stereotypes in mind when I start a project, and then I go behind the stereotype. I'm not trying to show that this is different. I just want to explore this deeper. And that's
it's true. It's what is very striking is you know, from the pictures that people can see in Belfast at Wilder Mann, these are real pictures of real people in their traditional costumes that they have often made themselves or inherited or somehow.
yeah.
These are not part of a gallery tradition. It's not a kind of, it's not something you find displayed somewhere else. It's not a touristic device. And you manage to look behind, as you say, in India, for instance, people who have been to India will not have seen your pictures or anything like them. You're showing things that take place in a very personal realm, a quiet place, not a public place.
Yeah.
And that makes your pictures very intimate somehow and touching.
What should I answer to that?
No, I mean, there's something that I wanted to ask you, which is, it's what we're talking about. It's partly about when you find your subject, you find what you want to take and how you want to take it.
Yeah.
How do you make the subject of your photographs, how do you make someone feel comfortable in front of the camera when you're on their territory?
I don't think I try to make them feel comfortable. I think it's more like I'm interested by when I go somewhere, the people, my protocol, I would say, the way I photograph makes I think it's particular. I work with quite some equipment. I work with a studio almost, so with assistants. And we don't look like tourists at all. We dress up in a certain way. We look quite professional. Maybe that also sounds like a stereotype, but once we go in a town or village and we meet the people, they know that there is something serious going on. They have the feeling that we are there for a serious reason, and they are ready to follow the choices. Like, then I'm saying, no, I'm not going to photograph this here. I'm going to go in that spot because I want to do it in that field. Sometimes I bring people in a place that they just did not imagine, just in the middle of a rice field, because I think it's much better than in front of a temple, and in a brick factory, or because I find it visual, because I find there's an interesting color connection, all these kind of things. And it's I can't really define it in advance, but what I can say is that usually behind the people I photograph, there is a space which is quite quiet. That is not too narrative. Like you may have a few cows behind in the background, but that's all the narration I can give. And after that, then the person is asked to pause and repose again until I get the right situation, the right move, the right gesture. And I think it's at that moment very precise. We are not getting things by coincidence. And and I try to make this person and its costume match into the landscape or in front of that wall. And until it doesn't match, I keep pushing and then I try again. So I think I stop when I get where I think that things are just matching correctly. So after that, the reaction of the person, I guess they can be quickly tired and surprised by the situation. They may believe that doing a photograph is just like clicking a few photos, and it's not happening like that. It's more like sculpting step by step a situation, like defining things precisely, and it works at the end.
So you have to establish quite a high level of trust right from the beginning.
Trust comes from different reasons, but yeah, I can say so. At least when they see me coming, then they believe, okay, this is not going to be a joke.
Yeah, it's a question of respect, and you respect them, and they have some respect for your project.
Kind of. I think of sometimes they don't know, or they maybe don't completely understand what's the project, and me neither, by the way. It's like I come with the idea that I'm going to do a book, or that I'm doing a research, and sometimes I go to photograph someone. I start something, and it may be not going to work. So I'm maybe not going to use that in a book I would like to do. So I have to experiment first, and then once I start to accumulate a certain quantity of photographs, and then I start to have a clear idea of what's the subject, etc., then it becomes really a long-term project. And then I get able to really explain what I'm working on, to really explain what I'm looking for. But for sure, the first and the second trip are always full of hesitations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And certainly people understand that you're taking photographs for a book, but
Yeah.
What we look at is not what they expect necessarily, because you say you take them out of their own, you don't want to photograph them in front of a temple if you think a rice field is better. It
Yeah.
gives a kind of a neutral backdrop.
Yeah, neutral. I mean, people believe strangely that photographing someone in front of a white wall, like Avdon did, for example, was neutral, but it's exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So the neutral doesn't mean that it's empty or white. It's neutral. It's more like I would say quiet than more neutral. Quiet, like that you can really concentrate on that person, the costume, the attitude, and so on, and that everything matched together.
Yeah.
But for sure, the idea is not to make something which is spectacular. Also, if for sure some of the situations or some of the costumes are from the start quite spectacular.
Yes, true. Do you have, I mean, is it a moment perhaps to look at some of your photographs as well?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I'm gonna share my screen. I don't know, from Wilder Mann or like that. You see things?
Why not? If you start with Wilder Mann, because I know that that's what's being shown in Belfast.
In
People can see
Belfast.
some
Yeah,
of these pictures.
yeah.
I
Well,
should say that Wilder Mann is published as a book, which is readily available. But if you're in Belfast, you can see these.
yeah. So that's a project which started in 2010, and that in fact I never really finished. Like I did the first book, and then I kept going on without really thinking that I would do a second book about Wilder Mann, but just that I wanted to push further and further. The reason why I do that is that after 2012, when the book came out, I started to be contacted by some groups all over Europe saying, we saw your book and you did not photograph us. And then that's the way I met people from Northern Ireland, for example. And then I say, okay, then I gonna come to meet you and photograph your group, etc. And then I pushed further. So the project started in 2010 in Austria. These photos are like this one is one of the first photographs I did. This guy called the Wilder, so like literally from the Wilderman word. It's the wine man. The costume is made from the moss. You call it moss, right?
Yeah, moss. Yeah.
From the trees. So every 5 years there's a secret group from that little town called Delft in Styria, and they collect the moss from the trees and to make the costumes. So there's like, it's only men, you don't know who they are, they have to hide their hands, they can't talk, etc. And then they are the white men of the village, etc. So they do it once every 5 years. And then I started to photograph these groups of Krampus, like these are the Krampus from Bad Mittendorf in South Tyrol. And as well.
This is on the border between Austria and Italy, right? In the mountains.
No, yeah, but you also have the South Tyrol from Italy, which is the Italian side. Yeah. So the Krampus are, the story about all the Krampus is that they come out for the 6th of December for Saint Nicolas, and they are supposed to scare the kids and so on. So from that I came back to France, and then I started to look around more traditions like that, saying there must be more. I knew about Sardinia, I heard about Hungary, and then I pushed further. So the way you see them here is the way I photograph them. It comes almost at the right order. So I went back. I went first to Hungary to photograph the Busho in Moacs next to the Dano and the river. And then it's just basically the same type of characters, like almost like devils, and they are also supposed to scare the population and so on. But I was not too impressed by the masks themselves like these, and much more interested by the silhouette. So let's say the silhouette to me was more efficient visually. So then I started really quickly to photograph them from the back, interested by the material, the belt, the fur, the horns, etc. And then I pushed and pushed further. So the story all over Europe, in fact, is almost the same. You often have a group of people and which are part of the masquerade, and these people are fighting against a devil or a wild animal. Like here, for example, on that photograph, this one called the Surzu, and the Surzu is the boar. But the Surzu in Sardinia can be different animals. It can be a bear, it can be a boar, it can be a deer. And these guys behind here, for example, called the Colonganos, are beating the Surzu until he dies. So you see the group here, and it tells you a lot about the situation. This is the Surzu again. And here you have different characters of the masquerade, and with sticks and the goats behind. And once the Surzu is dead, then this guy is playing music, and the goats are dancing around to wake him up, and then he's living again.
So, you know what you've done, Charles, that is really extraordinary is you identify these archetypes, and they seem to be very particular to a locality. You're talking about, in Hungary next to the Danube, but these are strangely direct. There seems to be a direct parallel when you take these traditions to Japan or to India or to South America, and you somehow find these parallel traditions. How does that strike you? It's extraordinary to me.
It's because it's not, first of all, there's nothing of universality. There's just sometimes there are some reason, and there may be some reason why a tradition could be found in Japan as similar as one in Germany or Austria. Like, for example, if I pick a photograph like this one from Yokai no Shima, you see.
So now we're in Japan.
The Nama-age, these two demons are very similar. They come also in winter time. They come early January. They call it Toshigami, and the Nama-age, they come to scare the kids in the village. They get into the house, and they are asking to the father, is there any lazy child in this house? And of course the father is saying, is showing his kids, and then the Nama-age are saying, okay, we're gonna take them to the mountains, and the kids is like crying, and then the father start to negotiate with the Namage, that he doesn't take his kids to the mountains,
So
and
this
then the
could be
Namage is drinking alcohol with the father, and he's telling to the kid, okay, you're gonna have to behave well, I'm coming back next year, etc. So the story is similar as what you would find with the Krampus, and this visit of the demons, the visit of the Krampus, or the whoever you call them, it's always that some people supposed to be the wild or the bad person or the gods, or are visiting the private place, and they are, first of all, I would say, visiting. That's very important. And then this is a moment when the community has to open the door, and once the door is open, then there are different symbols into that. Some countries may feel that, in some country it may sound like that when there's that visit, it's bringing good luck, or it's bringing good fortune, or it's protecting the family or protecting the house. In Northern Ireland, in Ireland as well, from Armagh to Dingle, you will find these rainbows that I can show. Here. These rainbows. Let me get them there. Oh, yeah, this is the one from Dingle, Fermanagh, and this one is from, the one was from Armagh. But there's a mistake in the bottom. No, it's Fermanagh. So, but these rainbows, once they visit the house, are supposed to bring there are different traditions. Like one say it's about bringing a bird, that the bird which the wren, which is supposed to be the bird which is the first one to sing when the days are getting longer. So, but all the stories are similar, but they just have regional particularities. It's just that usually the visits, like the visit of Santa Claus, is always that these people coming from like the beast or the demons or the gods are visiting the population to deliver a message, to share something, to protect the people, etc., etc. So why this is existing in Japan or in India sometime, or in South America, or wherever, it's probably because there have been different type of migrations. Also, some tradition may be not that old than we expect them, and they have been influenced from the cinema, influenced from fairy tale, influenced from I don't know. Like, you can completely imagine that some stories and some tradition came to Japan and connected to some other tradition, and maybe they came with the sailors from Germany and Netherlands, which were doing trade exchanges in some port like Nagasaki. So you can completely also imagine that some tradition crossed the sea, coming from Korea or coming
okay,
from.
so that's an interesting aspect, which is that stories travel. Stories that appear to be very local and appear to be traditional in one ancestral tradition, actually they travel. And you pick this up in Cimarron, the story of the African slave diaspora, traditions carried by slaves who escaped from the port where they were delivered, or from their masters. Yeah. And they would mix their own African traditions, sometimes tribal traditions, with local South American traditions. So this creates a new kind of hybrid story.
Yeah, then once again, that means that the tradition exists by sometimes the transfer or the shock can be also pretty violent. Its colonization is also forcing some population with certain tradition, certain customs, to accept the tradition of the one which is the colonial. So that's where it's getting complex and aggressive, but that's a reality. Like
it's
most
interesting.
yeah, tell me.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking of New Orleans and the Mardi Gras, which again, we don't think of perhaps straight away, but the Mardi Gras tradition picks up on this tradition of freed slaves, and celebration of liberation in a way.
Yeah, but that's really, it's interesting because we jump from one series to another very quickly, but it makes sense. When I've done Wilder Mann, then I decided to push the research further also on different series to see if there were connections, to see if there was something else, or if it was totally, I mean, if it was totally different, or if it was just the same. It's really, especially for a French, very easy to try to make things universal. And of course it's not. So the Mardi Gras Indians is the result of a strong syncretism. It's the meeting of several influences. And that's when I spoke 20 minutes ago about stereotypes. We are in the middle of that here. It's a tradition where some African American people created. It's a created tradition which is supposed to be a tribute to the runaway slaves, the maroons, which you call in Spanish the cimarron. And because of course everywhere there were slaves, running away, and running away was a way to resist. I mean, we know that in the story of slavery, only in a few places fighting against it, like making a strong revolution, like in Haiti, did not happen so much, or was just controlled by terror. So the idea of running away, escaping, is a way to resist. And then the maroon became, first was the sound, the word cimarron or maroon is negative. It's the Spanish word cimarron means literally to go back into the trees. So it's as an animal, as a monkey almost. And it was created by the Spanish colonial in a very aggressive way. But it became also, with time, it became very positive to be the descendant of a maroon, because you are a descendant of a resistant in a way. And the syncretism makes that. So the story is that in USA, some of these maroon were eaten by some native Indian tribes, like the Seminole, Apache, etc. So what happened is that with the Carnival of New Orleans, they started to celebrate their Afro descendants by saying that they were it was a tribute to these tribes which were protecting them in a way. The other story is, of course, that Buffalo Bill at that time had a show traveling all over the world and giving an imagery about the native Indian, which was a complete stereotype.
A complete myth, wasn't it?
Yeah, a myth, totally. And so I would say they embraced the myth of Buffalo Bill, and that's the result. So what you see here is a Mardi Gras Indian, which is at the same time connected with the African American culture, but also they tend to believe that there is a strong connection with the with the Yoruba religion from the west of Africa, and on the top of that, they that's also a way to represent the native Indian here. So it's like a triangle where there are three populations. The white colonial, and then the native Indian, and then the Afro-descendant.
This is something that you make very clear in all of your books, not just this one, Cimarron, but others, is that you set your pictures in context. But you know, your pictures work on different levels. On the one hand, we can just look at them. We can just look at them and get into the pictures and enjoy the colors and the shapes and the forms. And there's something extraordinary that we didn't see before. So they stimulate our imagination. The other thing that they do is that they provoke. And it's partly this that you're discussing now about notions of history, who tells the story, where do we stand with regard to the story? And you make this, it's not heavy, you're not didactic, you don't try to teach us something in a like a professorial way, but it's something that is provocative about your pictures. So we can enjoy your pictures in a lot of different ways. And one question I wanted to ask you, which is sort of related, what do you think that your subjects think when they are photographed? You know, the people who you take pictures of, how do they feel? I mean, of course, it's a huge question. It's going to be very many different answers, but you know, that what you make this trust, you take their photographs. What sort of response do you get from them?
Well, that's always a big question, that especially now, like you know that now the big question is always, who are you to do what you are doing? From where are you to deal with that subject? Is this your topic or not? You know, and now more and more we are dealing with these questions. So I would say I have no problem with the people I photograph, and I don't think they have any problem with me. It's but I have to deal, and I deal seriously and constantly with the question of post-colonialism.
Yes, I'm sure.
So I'm a French white guy, and I'm traveling somewhere in the world to photograph certain traditions. And on that, you may believe that there are similarities with some people who traveled in 19th century to do the same. But the relationship is completely different. And that this is complex, and I admit it.
Yes, I think that complexity comes through, not just in your pictures, but in the texts that accompany them. In the books that we've done together, yeah, you've always managed to make personal relationships with writers who are somehow connected with the traditions that you're photographing. And very often, this is not documentary photography, right? This is nothing that is aiming to be anthropological or somehow scientific. It's the opposite, in fact. It's really a promotion of an imaginative adventure. Is how you see it?
Yeah, I would say when I work on a project like that, like Cimarron or Yokai no Shima, I hardly understand what I'm doing. I photograph some people with some strange costumes, and I'm often not spending enough time with them to understand exactly what it is about. Like people may believe that I spend my time going in carnival or masquerades, but I don't. Like I do appointments. I often meet the people out of the festivities. So things are really happening on appointment, and we are constantly traveling from one region to another to be able to photograph what we have to photograph. So the relationship then with the person I photograph, how can I say? Not the person, but with the subject, is I discover step by step what it is, and I start to understand what it is and to understand what's the subject. But we're just working now on that book about India. And still, after all the texts we worked on, after all the research we did, collaborating with some people who are specialists from France, from India, um, and discussing a lot these last years about what it is this, what it is that, what it means. It's still hard to understand certain topics. It's still hard to tell some stories, or it's still hard to understand the theme, what this story tried to tell you. So, and I take it like that. Like I completely accept the fact that what I'm working on, I'm not completely understanding what it is. It's not because I've done a book about Cimarron or Yokai no Shima that I'm now a specialist of Japanese tradition or Indian tradition, etc. I work, I stay also behind my camera on that way, and I'm really, I'm not saying I'm skeptical, but specialists are not always specialists, and I also enjoy the fact that there are things that I can't understand, that still stay with a certain mystery for me. Like you are in a village and you photograph a guy dressed like a donkey, and he starts to tell you the story of his tradition. And at the end, you may have also an ethnographer telling you another version of the story. He will tell you the tradition means this, this, and that. And me, I try to sit in the middle and say, okay, the vision of the guy on that village, the way he's telling me the story, is as interesting as the story said by that ethnographer who wrote about it 20 years ago or 50 years ago. So I like the idea that it's not that clear. It's complex, and the complexity is what makes it rich as well. So you may accept that sometimes what you look at is just strange, and that you can't understand it, and it is fine for me, really fine. Like, I'm not, the books we are trying to do together, when you close the book, maybe you start to understand a few things, maybe you start to have a better overview of what it may be, but you will not say, okay, after I finished to read that book, I understood everything about Indian religion.
That's true. They're more provocative than that, because some things are contradictory, and we have to accept those contradictions or explore those contradictions. And in fact, you do that in your pictures anyway. When you go to different places and you find a different nuance for something, you may think we've discovered something once, but then you find it's completely different somewhere else. So it is a little bit, it's a stimulating kind of journey, I guess. I've got a tricky question for you. I hope you don't mind, and just, you know, see what you think. I'm interested to know what you find difficult when you're working. What is the thing that you find most difficult or upsetting, or something that makes life difficult for you? I mean, that might be revealing for us to hear.
Well, I have the difficulties now. I would say I started to do all this project in '99, so like 23 years ago. So I'm 47 now, and sorry, I'm 47 now. So I would say that I'm yeah, in the maybe at the middle of, or maybe at the end. I don't know. But anyway, when I started, I could go almost anywhere, like almost anywhere. And step by step now, and with what's happening all over the world and pretty close to Europe, I can feel the borders are closing and closing and closing everywhere. So I live in Normandy. We have a boat going to England. I'm not saying, but getting a passport to go to London is a bit weird, isn't it? But more than that, you know, that you can't fly over Russia anymore. So, or you can't go to Russia, or will we be able to work in China soon? Or this, I find it difficult. That
the paradox that the world seems to be closing in rather than opening.
Yeah, but also 10, 15 years ago, some people had the stupid idea that we were in a complete mondialization and globalization, that everything was, getting through the prism of Google, and that you could find information about everything all over the world and blah, blah, blah. This is completely wrong. The world has a strong complexity, and it's full of layers of layers of layers. And I find it good that anyway, after Wikipedia, Google, whatever you want, there you still don't understand the world where you're living, and that's the good point. I mean, I like the idea that we still don't understand anything about what's around us, and also if 20 years ago we were listening to some people telling us that the world now will just be global, etc., etc. So I feel that that this complexity, that you have different people in the world, maybe they may use the same language, but they won't mean the same stuff. The same, using the same word will have a different meaning in different cultures. And that there's a lot of people who don't understand that. What you call a god in South America, it has nothing to do with the god from India or a god in Japan. There's a completely different meaning into the same word. And so I think we are now in the middle of that, like the tension between the complexity, the difficulty to travel, to discover the world, and at the same time, the necessity to do it, to try to keep understanding, to try to keep communicating, to try to keep looking at each other. And I think that's the only answer to what's happening now, is that we have to keep connected to each other. We have to keep communicating and exchanging, because these exchanges are strongly protecting us. So
I think, that's a really well-made point. And what you've described and what your pictures describe is about diversity and about private worlds as well as public worlds. I mean, very much is about privacy and personal nature, which we can sometimes forget in a world that, as you say, it seems to be dominated by global communications networks. It's not always true. Sometimes we have very private ways of understanding each other, and these are something what your pictures show us is a kind of a opening into the imagination that we forget at our peril.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's. I just find it great after these years to still find things which are extraordinary. That I'm still finding or discovering things which people are not really looking with the same precision, if I can say so. I don't know if it sounds really clear, but when you look at my photographs, if you go into one of my exhibitions, what you will be in front of someone that you never really took care about. Like you look at something with more precision. And it's already a different way to look at the world around us. But yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Charles. And honestly, I'm very grateful to you. This is a really wonderful conversation. And it makes me want to go back and look at a lot of your pictures again and pick up the books. I hope that it's been helpful and instructive to everyone who's been listening. And if you don't know Charles's work, or you know it a little bit, I urge you to explore. In Belfast, I know you can see Wilder Mann is on display there. You could look it up online on the festival website, I'm sure. And the books that are published by Thames and Hudson and elsewhere around the world of your work and are readily available. I mean, it's really a fantastic exploration, Charles, and thank you for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope my English doesn't sound too bad, but I try to manage.
Your English is better than my French.
French.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway, many thanks to you, Charles, and thanks to everybody for listening.